February 14, 2014. Valentine's Day. While most of the world is thinking about flowers and dinner reservations, 18 radio frequencies crackle to life simultaneously across the mountains of Sinaloa, Mexico. Vehicles sit dark on sealed roads. Helicopters hover just beyond a ridgeline, engines at idle, invisible in the pre-dawn black. A perimeter, established hours ago, without a single leak, wraps around a compound like a fist slowly closing. Inside, a man wakes up, and immediately, he knows something is wrong. Not because of what he hears, because of what he doesn't. No footsteps on gravel, no dog bark, no guard movement on the northern perimeter. Just silence, the wrong kind of silence. This man has survived 17 years in the most dangerous industry on earth. He has outrun the DEA, the Mexican military, rival assassins, and 2 federal arrest operations that came close enough to grab his food off the table. He reads silence the way a ship captain reads weather. And this silence, this specific suffocating stillness, it only means one thing. He doesn't reach for a weapon, he reaches for his phone. No signal, and in that moment in a grey pre-dawn room, smelling of diesel and leather, Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Loera understands that the calculation has finally, irrevocably, shifted against him. This is the story of how the world's most wanted man got caught. Not because he got sloppy, not because one informant sold him out, but because of something far more interesting, and far more terrifying than that. Stay with me. To understand what happened in that compound, you have to start somewhere most people don't. Not with the violence, not with the tunnels, not with the billion-dollar fortune. You have to start with a small village in the Sierra Madre Mountains, called La Tuna, a municipality so remote that the Mexican federal government wasn't a presence, it was a rumor. When soldiers came through, they collected what they could find and left. There were no real jobs, no real economy, no real future, unless you counted the one crop that everyone grew and nobody talked about openly. Poppy. Joaquin Guzman grew up understanding the world worked a certain way. Officials were managed, not obeyed. Rules were negotiated, not followed. And the men who survived were not the strongest, they were the most useful. His formal education ended before it really started. As a teenager he was running errands for local growers, moving small loads, learning routes. He wasn't celebrated back then, he wasn't feared, he was just a logistics kid from the mountains, who was very good at remembering things. That's what caught the attention of Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. Now if you don't know that name, here's what you need to understand. In the 1980s, Félix Gallardo effectively industrialized Mexican drug trafficking. Before him it was scattered, regional, small-time. After him it was a corporate operation, routes, territories, wholesale pricing, institutional relationships. He didn't recruit generals, he recruited people from places like La Tuna, people who had no alternative loyalties, no outside options, and a very personal understanding of how enforcement actually worked in rural Mexico. Guzman wasn't valued for violence in those years. He was valued for precision, for understanding which officials needed money and which ones needed fear, and knowing those were often the same people approached in a different order. Read that again, because it matters. This was never just about drugs, it was about infrastructure. It was about understanding that a customs agent with a family and a mortgage is a different conversation than a customs agent who's already taking money from 3 other organizations. It was about building a web of compromised institutions so deep and so wide that by the time anyone tried to pull the thread, they didn't know where the thread ended and the fabric began. When Félix Gallardo was arrested in 1989, his empire didn't collapse. It fragmented, and fragmentation, in cartel logic, is just opportunity wearing a disguise. Guzman moved. Fast and smart, he didn't build an empire, he absorbed infrastructure that the state had spent a decade accidentally building for him. And over the next decade, what emerged became the most powerful drug trafficking organization in human history. Here's something the movies get wrong about the Sinaloa cartel. They show it as chaos, explosions, shootouts, bodies on highways. And yes, that existed. But that's not what made Sinaloa dominant. What made Sinaloa dominant was that it ran like a business. New corridors, vertical integration, production, transport, distribution, money laundering, all under one umbrella. Competitors weren't always killed, sometimes they were bought, sometimes they were simply underpriced until they collapsed. Market share was enforced not primarily through violence but through reliability. You place an order, it arrives, on time, correct weight, no drama. Violence, when it happened, was intentional, targeted. It was a communication tool. A rival found on a highway sent one kind of message. A journalist found in a similar condition sent a different kind. Neither required a press release. the message only required reception. And the communities living inside Sinaloa's corridors, they didn't have security, they had something worse, the management of insecurity. Schools closed early when tensions rose, families stopped reporting missing relatives, mayors kept their offices open, but everyone understood who actually held authority. The fear wasn't a side effect, it was the product. Fear suppressed cooperation with investigators. Silence created information gaps that investigators couldn't close. The population wasn't protected by the cartel, it was used by it. This is the part that gets lost when people talk about Guzman like a folk hero. The myth of Robin Hood in the mountains. The reality was communities held hostage by their own geography. His first federal arrest in 1993 should have been a wall. It wasn't. From Puente Grande Federal Prison in Jalisco, he continued running operations with a consistency that required, at minimum, the active cooperation of guards, administrators, and communication pipelines throughout the facility. The prison wasn't a cage, it was a relocation, a slight inconvenience, bureaucratically managed. His escape in January 2001, officially, he was smuggled out in a laundry cart, confirmed something extraordinary. The physical exit was the last step in a process that had been underway for months. The relationships he needed were already in place. He didn't escape from prison, he walked out of a building where everyone had already been paid to look elsewhere. The clock didn't reset after that escape, it accelerated. President Felipe Calderón deploys the Mexican military across cartel territories. On paper, a war on drugs. In reality, an operation that generated staggering human cost without strategic resolution. Between 2006 and 2012, conservative estimates put drug war fatalities above 60,000 people. 60,000. Entire cities, Ciudad Juárez, Culiacán, Tijuana, became places where violence wasn't an event, it was weather. Business owners paid multiple protection rackets simultaneously. Parents walked their children to school by different routes every single day because patterns got people killed. Meanwhile, the DEA was expanding. Extradition agreements that had historically been navigated around were tightening. Intelligence sharing between agencies was creating information streams that bypassed local enforcement, which mattered, because local enforcement was exactly where the contamination was worst. Guzman understood this. He started moving constantly. Residences changed on short notice. Trusted lieutenants were reshuffled. Communication protocols shifted. The network actually contracted as a security measure, which made it safer and less efficient at the same time. The DEA put a bounty on his head. $5 million, then more still, and 2 operations came close. Not close like they almost got a tip, close like they retrieved food still warm on a table, clothing still in drawers. The target had been there hours before, maybe minutes. Each time, analysts looked at what went wrong, and each time, the answer was the same. The information had leaked, not through carelessness, through the fundamental architecture of Mexican law enforcement itself. Every time investigators moved through standard channels, those channels contained personnel with cartel-adjacent relationships. And someone somewhere made a phone call. To catch Guzman, they wouldn't just need better intelligence, they'd need a different kind of operation entirely. The approach that worked started not with a raid. It started with weeks of quiet, accumulating work, pattern analysis, signals intelligence, physical surveillance conducted by small teams operating with strict compartmentalization. The number of people who had full situational awareness was deliberately aggressively reduced, not because of bureaucratic secrecy, but because every additional person with full knowledge was an additional leak risk. The units selected were Mexican Naval Infantry, SEMAR, chosen partly for their institutional separation from the law enforcement bodies most deeply compromised by cartel relationships. And crucially, this time, the intelligence didn't flow through the usual pipes. By February 13, 2014, the picture had resolved. Not from a single informant, from the convergence of multiple intelligence streams, pointing at the same compound in Culiacán. By 3 a.m. on the 14th, the perimeter was complete. Sealed roads, blocked communications, helicopters beyond the ridgeline, waiting. And something new, something that changed everything. They had mapped the tunnels. Prior operations had always focused on the structure above ground, entry points, exits, guard positions. And Guzman had beaten them every time by going underground. The compound near Culiacán had tunnel access beneath the main residence. He'd used something similar in a prior raid, vanishing into the earth while operators cleared rooms above him. This time, the exits were covered before anyone touched the front door. Back to that room. He moves through the compound. No guards on the northern perimeter. Communication protocol. No response. The tunnel beneath the bathtub. His calculated exit route. The infrastructure he trusted. He moves toward it. Naval infantry are already there. He surfaces in a drainage channel adjacent to the tunnel system. Not in a firefight, not in a dramatic standoff with operatives rappelling from helicopters while he trades gunfire in the street. The apprehension is almost bureaucratic in its precision. Hand secured, identity confirmed, chain of custody established. 6:40 in the morning. 17 years of institutional immunity. 16 years of operational freedom after a federal sentence. 2 near captures. An escape from a maximum security federal prison. An entire architecture of survival built from corrupted relationships and compromised institutions, constructed over 3 decades, ends in a drainage ditch before breakfast. He doesn't speak. According to personnel present, there was nothing useful to say. The announcement came hours later. President Peña Nieto's government framed it as a law enforcement victory. Internationally, agencies that had been chasing this case across multiple administrations exhaled cautiously. Too cautiously, as it turned out. Within 72 hours, succession calculations inside Sinaloa were already running. The structure Guzman had built, deliberately, carefully, was never dependent on a single node. Ismael Zambada Garcia, El Mayo, had never been captured and maintained full operational continuity. Regional coordinators had standing orders. Supply chains did not pause for a leadership transition. In the communities throughout Sinaloa, the reaction wasn't relief, it was anxiety, because these communities had seen this before. When a major cartel figure goes down, rivals test the edges, internal factions maneuver, violence spikes while a new equilibrium gets hammered out. The people who pay the price are not the ones making the calculations. Businesses sealed early, school attendance dropped, municipal police braced themselves. The disruption didn't come as a single explosion. It dispersed across weeks, across corridors, across incidents that didn't make international headlines, but registered with absolute precision in the families who lived through them. Guzman was extradited to the United States in January 2017. Tried in federal court in Brooklyn, the trial produced extraordinary testimony. The corrupted officials, the operational mechanics, the sheer institutional reach of what he'd built. Convicted on all 10 counts in 2019, sentenced to life plus 30 years in a maximum security facility where no laundry cart exits. And the organization he built, it adapted. The trafficking infrastructure he helped construct continued running. Fentanyl, which barely registered as a cartel product during his peak years, became the dominant export, responsible for more American deaths annually than any conflict the country has fought in decades. The roots he established are still active. The institutional relationships his organization cultivated continue to function in evolved form. The Sinaloa cartel did not end, it just continued without him. So what does this actually mean? Here's the honest answer. The capture of Joaquin Guzman Loera did not demonstrate that institutions can defeat organized crime. It demonstrated something much narrower and much more complicated. It demonstrated that under specific conditions, which were difficult to create and nearly impossible to replicate, those institutions could remove one person from a system that was never dependent on one person. The fog in Sinaloa lifts by mid-morning, the roads reopen, the machine does not notice who is gone. The real story of El Chapo was never about a man. It was about what happens when corruption becomes structural rather than personal. When the people enforcing laws are the same people being paid not to. When communities are not collateral damage, but operational infrastructure. Their silence purchased, their fear manufactured, their lives reorganized around someone else's logistics problem. Removing the man from that equation didn't remove the equation. It just opened a job vacancy at the top. Which is why, if you want to understand what's happening at the US-Mexico border right now, what's driving fentanyl deaths in American cities right now, what's shaping the politics of the entire Western Hemisphere right now, you have to understand that the story didn't end in a drainage ditch in Culiacan on Valentine's Day morning. It continued. As it always does. The fog comes before dawn. It always does in this part of Sinaloa, and out there right now, someone is already making the next set of calculations.